Good afternoon, good folks, and welcome to the City of Muskegon City Planning Commission meeting for this Thursday, May 16th, 2024. We're calling this meeting in order. It is 4:12 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
All right. Commissioner Willis, Leroy,
Here.
Cipher,
Here.
Keener, Zaid, Montgomery Keast, Blake,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Gowron.
Here. All right, we have quorum. Thank you. So first order of business, because we do not have our chair or vice chair for this meeting, is the selection of a chair for the course of this meeting. I'm sitting here just to call to order, but it's at the discretion of the planning commission as to who you wish to have chair the rest of this meeting. So we'd entertain a motion in that regard.
I move to appoint Commissioner Johnson as the chair for this month's meeting.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Seifert, supported by Commissioner Willett Roy. Roll call, please. Oh, any discussion?
I agree.
Roll call, please.
All right. Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Montgomery Keast.
Here.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry. Let's see. Cipher,
Yes.
Willett, Leroy,
Yes.
Gowron,
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes. All right, don't have to switch seats. Moving on. First item of business, approval of minutes from the meetings of April 11th, 2024.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Support.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Seifert, supported by Commissioner Willett Roy. Any discussion with regard to the minutes or amendments? No? Then roll call, please.
All right. Commissioners Johnson,
Here. Or, yes.
Gowron,
Yes.
Willett, Leroy,
Yes.
Cipher,
Yes.
Keener. Oh, sorry. And Blake.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Next item of business is public hearings with regard to case 2024-09. It's a staff-initiated request to rezone the following properties from R1 low-density single-family residential to R2 medium-density single-family residential for 1510, 1520, 1528, 1536, 1542, 1548, 1554, 1562, 1568, 1582, 1590, 1598, 1602, 1610, 1616, 1622, 1636, 1646, 1650, 1656, 1662, 1668, 1682, 1686, 1692, and 1704 Beach Street, as well as 3660 Indiana Avenue, 1360, 1368, 1374, 1386, 1412, 1430, 1448, 1450, 1516, 1517, 1523, 1530, 1538, 1550, 1551, 1560, 1563, 1569, 1570, 1579, 1580, 1590, 1600, 1603, 1622, 1631, 1635, 1636, 1632, 1634, 1640, 1642, 1651, 1652, 1661, 1663, 1666, 1674, 1675, 1682, and 1690 Nelson, as well as 3600 and 3601 Ohio Avenue, and finally 3691 Simpson Avenue. And I regretted reading them out halfway through them instead of just saying as presented. Nonetheless, everyone at home has heard these numbers, and it is known what addresses we are contemplating rezoning at this meeting. So this is a public hearing. First up, we're going to be opening up to comments from the audience, as well as we'll be going to the phones for anyone wishing to comment by phone. We are going to hear a report from staff first, then open it up to comments from the audience. If you do wish to give comment on this, do encourage you to complete a public comment form at the back of the room and give that to our planning staff at the end of this dais. Ask that you provide your name and home address. We'll not be announcing your home address, nor will I be asking you to announce your home address. That's just for our records, the home address. I will be acknowledging what neighborhood, if you're a city resident, that you are hailing from and joining us tonight. So first up, staff report.
Sure. So over the past few years, staff's received some phone calls from property owners in this area. Some of them had some concerns with buying or selling the properties, some of them being legally non-conforming, some of them having issues with refinancing with a non-conforming property, some of them that wanted to split their large parcels, but they were just shy of the needed property to do so. So, after taking so many calls, we decided to hold a focus group, and we did so a couple months ago in the planning office, and invited everybody within the focus group to come hear our ideas about how we could solve some of these problems with some zoning amendments and rezoning. So staff proposed to rezone this to R2. That would bring most of these properties, all of these properties, into conformance. You can see we've prepared these maps that were attached. So the zoning scenario maps, if you could pull those up, Sarah. There. Yep. So the first slide here, is that up for everybody? Okay. This first slide here shows all the parcels that are under 6,000 square feet, which is the needed amount of square footage to be considered a buildable lot. The ones that are shaded here face problems, like I stated earlier. Some of the properties are considered legally, or are considered a legal lot of record. That means if they're the same size they exactly were when they were platted, and they were platted as a buildable lot, they could be considered buildable even if they're smaller than that standard. However, that's not always the case, and it takes a lot of research to find each individual property, whether or not it's the case. So a simple rezoning should be able to fix most of these. If we go to the next slide. These are the parcels that could currently be split in this area. If we go to the next slide, we'll show we'd go from 6 lots that could be split to, or 6 additional lots to 11 additional lots here if we were going to go to the R2. And I think there's one more. These are currently vacant parcels. So even if some of these properties were able to be split, a couple of them have homes right down the middle, so they're not going to be able to be split anyways. So we're not going to have to worry about too many extra lots if this was to, if this rezoning was to go through. I did note that really the only difference that there is between R1 and R2, R1 you need 6,000 square foot compared to 4,000 square foot in a R2. R1 you need 50 foot of road frontage compared to 40 foot of road frontage for an R2. That's where the splits come in. And the setbacks are also just a little bit different. We can pull that up and we can see the setbacks for the side in a 1 and 2 story home. And a R1 is 6 feet and 8 feet. And R2 it's 6 foot and 7 foot. So a 2 story can go 1 foot closer, but 1 story is it's the same side setbacks and front and rear setbacks. So we sent a notice to everybody within 300 feet of the target area, and we did not hear any direct comments other than a couple people asked when the public hearing was going to be to comment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Franzik. So I'm going to hold off on questions from the Planning Commission until after we conclude the public hearing. In which case, we're going to open up to folks in the audience.
If I could mention one more thing.
Yes, certainly.
Could we go through, there's a map somewhere right here. So the blue area on this map, this shows the area we took out. This was part of the focus group. And during the focus group, we listened to comments, and some of the property owners facing Harbortown Circle did not want to be included. And after further research, they're all very large lots, well over 50 foot. It really wouldn't matter in terms of them having any issues refinancing or building a home. So we decided to take that out of the focus area.
Okay. Thank you, Director Franzik. All right. Who in the audience wishes to give comment on this item for this public hearing? Yes. Do the Franzik,
I
but
can take care. Thanks.
Renee Kamara,
Renee Camargue joining us from the Beechwood Bluffton neighborhood. Welcome.
Here, Marquette neighborhood, and
Yeah,
we
but-
were always our own neighborhood until the Beechwood Bluffton newsletter came along, and now we're lumped in with them. But we used to have our own little neighborhood because it's pretty special.
Welcome.
So, anyway, what I've read about R1 to R2 is duplexes, maybe small apartment buildings. You could turn your detached garage into a short-term rental. You might be able to turn your he shed or she shed into a short-term rental. And I don't like that idea. And the density down there is crazy. I mean, do any of you live down there? Do you know what goes on down there? I mean, day and night, 24/7. So anyway, I'm on a lot that's actually, it was 50 by 100, and then our neighbor sold us his lot. So then we got a letter from the city, and they wanted us to combine it, which we agreed to do, which now when I think about it was really stupid. Because then we went back to try and get it subdivided again like it was, and we were told we couldn't do it because lots aren't that small anymore. But now it looks like maybe we could, because then the minimum lot's gonna be, 50 feet or whatever? But anyway, so anyway, I guess that's my comment. I'm not for it. And, well, the other thing I thought of was the insurance we've been paying, if our house burns down, one of these smaller houses, lots, if it burns down, can they rebuild? Have they been paying all this insurance, house insurance, for nothing because it can't be rebuilt? I saw that on our neighborhood page. So I don't know if that's just a rumor or how that affects, but maybe we need to get reimbursed for the premiums over the last 40 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Camargue. Appreciate you joining us and sharing your perspective. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Could share your name?
Yes,
And
I'm
you're
Kat.
joining from the same neighborhood?
I am from the same neighborhood. My name is Kathy Young. I have a house at 1579 Nelson, and I also own the vacant lot at 1569 Nelson. So I have two questions, and the first one is currently, okay, I have a 5,400 square foot lot. My house, garage, deck cover 2,310 square feet, which is 43%. And you're saying that if it were to burn down to the ground, there is a possibility the city could refuse me to replace my original structure. Is that what you are trying to tell me?
So we may get that to it as part of the staff discussion, or the commission discussion with the staff, but right now it's not a Q&A or engagement time. It's an opportunity for you to address
Okay,
the planning
okay,
commission and share
okay.
your
Well,
thoughts.
in that case, if that is the case, that is whatever.
You're certainly welcome to
Borderline
raise
criminal.
questions, and we may ask them ourselves.
So that's one question. Then what I'm understanding, however, is if we were to rezone, I could come in, my house burns down again, and I could now build a house up to 3,240 square feet footprint, which is 40% larger than what I currently have. And that would be fine. Right, okay. So what I'm envisioning here in 15 to 20 years is a neighborhood full of huge houses on these postage size, stamp size lots. And when we acquired the lot next to us, the vacant lot, I understood that I may have to go through the variance process in order to build. And I was okay with that and didn't have any plans to build. And if it ever came about that I wanted to build, I figured that I could work it out with the city and the neighbors and come up with something that would be suitable for all. So I think the variance process is in place for a reason. We've got a really cool neighborhood. It's got cool little houses that are all different. There's plenty of space between the houses for breathing and whatever. The other thing is I did send in a 9-second video of a Lake Michigan house on fire. And for those of us that live in the neighborhood and know what it sounds like when the wind roars through there, basically 300 days a year, I think people would be interested in seeing that video. Is there any possibility of showing that?
We don't play videos now.
I hope you will all look at it, and when you see the flames going sideways and the inferno that takes place, you really don't want those houses packed in there any more densely than they currently are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Appreciate you joining us this evening. Anyone else in the audience wishing to give public comment on this item? No? We're going to be going to the phones, and that phone number is 231-724-6721. If you are at home or wherever watching this on YouTube, Facebook, or Comcast Channel 96, you're welcome to phone in on this item, which is with regard to rezoning from R1 low density single family residential to R2 medium density single family residential for recommendation to the City Commission for final consideration and potential approval. And so, again, that phone number, if you wish to give comment on this item, is 231-724-6721. All right, no phone calls? Okay. One last call for audience. You wish to give public comment?
Ed Bodman. I also live on Nelson Street, and I haven't heard any comments as it relates to the critical dune requirements for building within this area, and I'm hoping that, I guess, there'll be some more conversations about what that overlay of building requirements on a critical dune is for those properties that that have that criteria, which I think speak to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, last call for comment on this public hearing from the audience. All right, seeing none, commissioners, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move
So
to close the public hearing. Support.
We have a motion by Commissioner Garland, supported by Commissioner Seifert to close the public hearing. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Gawron,
Yes.
Willett Leroy,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
and Blake.
Yes.
All right, the public hearing is closed. Now is an opportunity for commissions to. Yes.
Could I just
Director
clarify
Franzen.
a couple things I heard? So this this rezoning would only affect the size of a buildable lot. It would not allow duplexes or accessory dwelling units. So every house would still need to be a single family home. The variance process would not be the way to go to split your lot. We have standards that a lot has to be 6,000 square feet under R1. If you're just under that, you could apply for a variance, but you need to prove what your hardship is as to why you shouldn't have to follow the rules everybody else has to. So I don't see how that there can be a hardship there. This would be the process to make sure that you could be able to split the lot. Also, in terms of refinancing, we do hear that from time to time, and I understand people's concerns. You're paying insurance on a piece of property, but if that property is considered unbuildable, we have to deny it if it's destroyed more than 75% of its replacement value. Your option there would be a variance, and I think it would be very hard pressed to come in front of a ZBA saying you had a house, it was there, and not be granted the variance. I think you'd have a good shot at it, but rezoning it to R2 would ensure you don't even have to go down that route. So those are just some of the things I wanted to clear up that I heard from some of the comments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Franzik. Yes, I mean, we can proceed with additional discussion and questions once a motion has been made. And of course, that motion may be amended subsequently. But so that we can proceed with discussion and question, may I have a motion? You can say it's presented or the addresses as listed.
Okay, so we're going down to the motion suggested. I move that the request to rezone the following properties as mentioned from R1 low density single family residential to R2 medium density single family residential be recommended to the city commission for approval.
Support.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Willett Roy and supported by Commissioner Seifert. So, discussion. As the motion maker, do you have any questions or comments to kick us off?
Can we speak to the inquiry about the critical dune and whether?
Oh, yes, sorry. It won't change the critical dune at all. I believe every property in here is in the critical dune, and they'll have to follow the same steps they'd have to, whether it's zoned R1 or R2. And those standards don't change at the state's level when you apply, so it'll be the same.
So no form of zoning can negate that state law with regard to protection
Correct.
of critical
Yep.
dune areas. Okay. Follow up, Commissioner Willett Leroy.
That was it on that one?
All right. Commissioner Seifert.
Director Franzik, this might be an unfair question, and I apologize that I didn't ask this ahead of time. Historically, the city has rezoned areas in the past to be less dense when originally they were more dense.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any evidence that this occurred in this area, looking at how the houses were spaced?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of history. I actually meant to get into that. Of the R1, R2, and R3 districts came about in 2015. Throughout Muskegon's different iterations of our zoning ordinances, the minimum lot sizes have fluctuated. Traditionally, you'd been able to build on 33-foot wide lots, 30-foot wide lots. We see a lot of those. And then we realized about 10, 15 years ago, and we hadn't been building a lot of houses. There wasn't that interest, so we didn't see it. But we realized a lot of these lots throughout the whole city are unbuildable because there was a push, I believe in the 80s, around the 86 zoning ordinance. The thought was the more suburban houses were attractive. So at the time, it was rezoned to have a 50-foot wide lot with 6,000 square foot. But many of our downtown neighborhoods, lots don't even meet that. So that was not a good thing in terms of redevelopment. So what we did is we took a look at that time of how these blocks were created. And it appeared that many of them were created, whether it was a 50-foot wide lots in some blocks, 40-foot wide lots in some blocks, or 30-foot wide lots in some blocks. So we tried to lump those together, and we created these 3 different zoning districts so that we could start building houses again on lots that traditionally were built. This specific area, I don't see a lot of evidence for 33-foot lots combined into 66-foot lots. I know that's kind of how we see some of the larger ones. So I'm not sure. I don't think we've really changed the density much down there, other than going from these R1, R2, and R3s. But since that 9 years, I don't know how many lot splits we've seen. Maybe 1 or 2 because of that.
Then one
Was that
and
the
then
question?
Yeah, then a follow up, not necessarily related to the history question, but looking at the scenario maps, there's currently 7 vacant parcels, most of which, 4 of which are, 6 of which are along Nelson, 1 is on Beach. And of those, I'm not really seeing any that couldn't be split right now under the current zoning, and I'm flipping back and forth so I could be missing one, that would be able to be split more under the requested rezone.
It's kind of hard to read. Could you pull it up on here?
Really, it looks like the 2 on the east end or the south end of Nelson would be the only two. Those two, yeah, where your cursor is, that would be large enough to be split, and the furthest to the south is could be split at the current time.
Could you go to? So parcels that could currently be split is here.
Yep.
And then if you could go back up to that could be split with R2. So what was the question?
And then if you look at the lots that are vacant, I was getting to your point of that a number of these lots have houses that would sit
Oh,
on
yes.
the portion of the parcel that could be subdivided. And so when you look at where the vacant parcels are in relation to the lots that could be subdivided, really the only one that I'm seeing is on the far south end of Nelson.
That could be split post rezoning.
Yes, that couldn't.
You're talking about that one then?
No, this
That
one.
one's already allowed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That even with ones that are not allowed.
The only one that I could see that is vacant presently and that would be eligible to be split post rezoning is close to Watson and Nelson. It's that one.
Oh, sorry. I guess yeah. My eyes jumped the neighboring parcel there. So, but it's not vacant.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
Currently vacant parcel is that one there.
That one.
Yeah. Could
And
is eligible. Oh. Yeah.
That one.
Oh, it's next.
So that's the second one.
Oh, it's
there.
next door to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to read in the map. So
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't look like any. Basically, the question we're trying to ascertain, if I'm understanding correctly, are there any parcels that are presently vacant which are not eligible for splitting at this time, but would become eligible for splitting with the rezoning to R2?
Correct.
Did you notice that in your research, Jamie?
I thought there was one, but it was actually the neighboring property that was confusing me, jumping back before maps or back and forth. Currently vacant.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing any additional that cannot be split now that would be able to become split if this rezoning happened.
One of them, the one you
One?
talked about on Nelson by Watson.
Okay, so
That
is,
one becomes able to, and I think the one all the way to the north does as well.
It's not vacant.
Oh, those aren't vacant.
Yeah,
Neither one of them are vacant.
Yeah, those aren't vacant.
Okay, so then no.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't look like there are any lots
Okay.
that are currently vacant that would become eligible for splitting post rezoning. In that regard, it's not creating any
New splits.
new splits or new
Right.
greater density in that
Yeah.
regard. All right. Any further follow up?
No, sir.
Commissioner Langford? I'll go to Commissioner Gowan and then come back to you after checking with Commissioner Blake. But Commissioner Gowan.
Right. So the short and skinny of it is, with what we're attempting to do today, would only make these orphan properties, which are in that area of legally non-building. You've indicated that, yeah, we would have no choice if something burns down to call it buildable, because as it stands right now, it's legally designated as non-buildable. This now allows them to become, legally conforming, but it does not, as asked, provide for putting accessory units, duplexes, quads, or anything. These remain single-family residential, and we've determined that there is no excessive amounts of lots that could be subdivided. willfully or otherwise. And critical dune stands as it does. That's a state function, so people would still have to jump through that hoop. This only now provides for calling these non-conforming lots conforming because now they become buildable. And that's it.
Correct.
Thank you.
We when we rezoned all of the R properties in 2015, looking back, I wish we would have just recommended that this be R2 from then, but we were looking at hundreds of different blocks. So I don't think we got it right every single time. And through conversations we hear with people and sometimes just going through the zoning maps, we notice some things. So, we may be looking at this going forward in the future just to kind of right size some of these blocks we might not have gotten right the first time. So.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, Commissioner Garland?
That is it.
Thank you.
Sir.
Commissioner Blake, anything to ask or add at this time?
Nope, I was just worried about, the density and if that's okay and the protection of the dunes, and you explained that very well, so I'm fine.
Thank you, Commissioner Blake. Commissioner Leroy.
Just kind of a additional comment on the usage of a variance is really something that needs to be a method of last resort. And so the intention of this, it seems, is actually to avoid variance requests at the moment. And because residents have asked for this change in order to, manage their quality of life, the ability to refinance their homes. So I would be in favor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Seifert?
And just something else that I'm considering as I'm looking at this is we've made choices in the past that had consequences if properties did burn down where they ended up as vacant lots. And this is one of those situations where that would be proactive so that this wouldn't be the outcome of that. So when looking at all the information that we have before us together with historically what we've seen in the city, I feel like this is the right move for the change of zoning in this area, especially considering it doesn't create additional lots that can be split.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, first I want to say thank you to our planning team and staff for being responsive to the residents who did initially reach out with the problem and the concern that they had, and our staff working with them on troubleshooting and trying to find solutions for them, and then realizing that there are other properties in similar situation in the area, deciding to have a community forum to engage with the neighborhood and the property owners there to understand if this is something that they may want to have rezoned on their properties or would be suitable for the entire area. And so then you further tweaked it based upon that feedback. So I just want to extend my appreciation and thanks to staff for being responsive to that and carrying that forward. While a house on a non-conforming or otherwise unbuildable lot right now could pursue a variance to rebuild in the event it were to be destroyed, more than 75% of which, and I would say if I were on the Zoning Board of Appeals, I would very likely support rebuilding it. The dilemma is that's not a guarantee. There is an inherent risk with going before a ZBA, which is not an elected body, and being at their mercy to say, can I rebuild my house? And there is a cost to pursue that appeal or to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and there's a time investment as well to do so, and you're not going to get a guaranteed outcome. Whereas this rezoning, which does align with the historic development patterns of the neighborhood, gives the property owners as a use by right to rebuild that house as it stands, saving you time and money of pursuing a ZBA appeal. In that regard, I'm inclined to support referring this to the City Commission with a recommendation for adoption. It does seem sensible, and it does align with the historic development patterns of the area. And it is single family, both R1 and R2 are single family, just providing a little bit more flexibility in terms of the housing types and options on the lots themselves. So, unless there are any other questions or comments, then I would go to roll call. Well, roll call, please.
Commissioners Johnson,
Yes.
Arron,
Yes.
Willett Leroy,
Yes.
Seifert,
Yes.
and Blake.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Next item. There's so many windows open. Here we go. New business, case 2024-10, a request for a minor amendment to the plan unit development at 1148 and 1204 West Western Avenue, otherwise referred to as Adelaide Point, by Adelaide Point QOZB LLC. Director Franzit.
This is the proposed fifth amendment to the PUD. We just had the fourth amendment come before this board in February. The pool was actually on the plan, but it was not called out, so I don't think we noticed it. So we wanted to bring this back. There was also a list of conditions placed on the approval. Staff included the approved with conditions letter to the developer that we sent after the city commission meeting. It appears that they have addressed everything that you would address on the plan. They were missing the landscaping plan, but we do have that now. If you could pull that up, Sarah. The planning's already in, but we wanted to have that on the plan for future reference. And I did want to talk about the dock. Let's see. It says M2 should be shortened by half of the proposed length, reduction being inward. And I just wanted to make sure that that's what the commission was envisioning. Yeah. So this is the updated site plan that we see here on the screen.
Oh, I see the landscape. Okay, you got it.
Yeah, it's,
Zoom. Okay, it's small.
arborvitaes
Yeah.
that are in there. We don't have standards for medians, but we did feel it should be landscaped, so he did a good job with that.
So the request is add to the pool at the R1 building in the northwest section of the property.
Yep. I think, well, this is the plan that was handed in today, or yesterday with the landscaping. But I'm seeing M3 listed on there twice again that had
Oh yeah,
initially
M3 had been removed in the southwest quadrant. Of
It
the
was
marina.
when it was in our packet, but it looks like you might have updated the wrong one. But this is just for landscaping, so we could just cut this out and just say this is the landscaping plan.
But we're only being asked with regard to the pool, right? That's the sole
Yes.
thing that was
Yeah.
before
So-
us this evening. And so we're not adopting this site
No.
plan.
No.
We're adopting, if we so choose, to consider it a minor amendment and to be handled by the planning commission alone, we're being asked to consider, one, is this a minor amendment to be handled by the planning commission alone? And two, is this okay? Do we accept this change to the PUD with the addition of the pool next to the building, the R1 building, which is the condo building at the northwest section of the property?
The other plan.
And so, first, I would like to hear about whether this is an acceptable minor change that can be handled by us alone, or if anyone has objections to that and thinks that this should be referred to the city commission for consideration. Commissioner Seifert.
I believe this is a minor amendment. The pool was originally on the PUD. It was an oversight that it got left off. So I believe this is something that we can handle here at the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Seifert.
I would agree.
Thank you, Commissioner Gowron. Any objections to that? All right, I would concur as well. So, that out of the way, Commissioner Gowron.
Yes, I then would move that the request for a minor amendment to the plan unit development at 1148 and 1204 West Western Avenue, Adelaide Point, be approved with the following conditions. A landscaping plan for the street median to be approved by staff. We've addressed the landscaping. And there you have it.
Support?
We have motion by Commissioner Gowron, supported by Commissioner Seifert. Is there any questions or comments, or anyone wish to hear from the property owner? think the
see
property owner
exactly-
may wish to present to us or share with us. Yes, Commissioner.
exactly what site plan we're looking at, because the one you've just shown only shows the pool on the top right, not on the bottom left, referenced by B4.
It's on under R1.
Yeah, it's on the R1 over by the R northwest corner.
See where R1 is, but I'm just saying there's no pool on it. Okay. What I'm saying is B4 is a pool, B4 is a pool. There's
Oh,
no pool.
what you're saying is that this does not have the B4 connected to that pool. B4 is showing
It's just like a
elsewhere in
random
another
square.
pool, but this site map just is not showing that identified as B4.
So that's why I'm confirming that that's in fact supposed to be the pool.
Yes.
Yes.
So the-
Yeah. So yeah, for the record, we're referring to the pool adjacent to the condo building in the northwest corner of the property, or I guess the west corner of the property. So
Okay. Mr. Leesma, you wish to address the Planning Commission? You are the applicant. Please introduce yourself.
Ryan Leesma, Adelaide Point QOCB LLC. I just want to comment on M2. I guess I'm not necessarily asking for anything to be changed, but M2 is shortened by 50%. And I would encourage members of the Planning Commission at some point to come out and take a look at that peninsula, because it's markedly above the water elevation. I know there are some concerns about boats blocking the viewscapes of downtown, which if somebody were to come out and take a look at it, I think the elevation of that is sufficiently high. So I would ask at some point there be a level of reconsideration on that, because I think it would welcome more visitors to the city.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Leesma. Any questions for Mr. Leesma while he's here? No? Thank you. All right. Is there any further questions or discussion on this item? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Commissioners Johnson,
Yes.
Gowron,
Yes.
Roy,
Yes.
Piper,
yes.
and Blake.
Yes.
Thank you. That has been approved. And next item is old business approval of bylaws. I'm going to table that to the next meeting, and we're going to move on to, or defer that to the next meeting. Moving on to zoning reform presentation.
Yeah, you gotta pull up the presentation.
Good afternoon. Would you kindly introduce yourself, sir?
Amy Pesh with the Planning Department. All right, so we are going to be talking, this is sort of a joint presentation between Mike Franzik and I, talking about potential zoning reform recommendations that we are bringing before you. And this is in response to the housing needs assessment that was completed recently. So awkward moments where I don't control the slides, but so as many of you know, there is a nearly 3,000 housing unit gap in the housing needs for the city of Muskegon over the next 5 years, and that is 2022 to 2027. And in order to keep up with demand, we would need to build to try to meet that gap. Housing costs for both renter and owner-occupied housing units right now are increasing quickly, and this is all due to the shortage of units. The city has 786 vacant buildable lots within our current single-family zoning districts, and we are also working with limited market rate apartment units that are either planned, have been developed over the past few months, or are in the process of being built. So this is taken directly from the housing needs assessment. This breaks down between for sale product and rental product, the varying price points that are needed in the city. The grand total comes to, just as I said, short of 3,000, 2,924 units that are needed for that 5-year period. 1,611 total rental units and 1,303 total for sale units are needed at this time. So the main thing that we're talking about today in terms of zoning reform deals with the yellow portion of this pie chart. That is our single family zones. They account for a full 38% of the city's total land area, and that's the largest of any land use, and obviously the reason that we're focusing on it. This breakdown doesn't include any of the available land that are outside single-family zoning districts. So when I'm talking about housing units, I'm talking strictly about our single-family residential zones in the city. And I'm ignoring things at this time that deal with multiple family zones or form-based code zoning districts, strictly single-family. As some of you know, there are, well, really, we just discussed it at decent length. There are 3 different versions of our single-family zones, the R1, R2, and R3. As Mike stated, those were created a few years back to accommodate differing lot sizes that we find throughout the city. The chart on the right here shows the differences between each of those. That's really the primary change that happens from R1, R2, and R3 zone. But as you can see, 59% of our single-family residential zones are classified as R1 currently. That's somewhat of a byproduct of them having larger lots. They just take up more land. 28% for R2, and then only 13% is our R3 zoning district. So, as I mentioned, there are 786 vacant residential lots in those single-family zones. At this time, the city owns about 1/4 of those, 204. The county land bank owns 40, and that is about another 5%. And then a full 70% of those lots are currently in private hands. They're privately owned, and the other remaining 30% remain in public hands. So we call these build-out scenarios. We can call them housing barometers, whatever we want to call them. These are a breakdown of the number of units that are needed, which you can see in the lighter shade of red. That goes just shy of 3,000, and the amount of housing that we can currently build. So in our current single-family zones, there is the idea that every lot will have a single house on it. It's a single-family zoning district. That's not the case, as we discussed with the case earlier in this meeting. Many of these lots can be split, and that occurs throughout the city. Some lots are very large, some are small enough to remain as one lot, but generally speaking, that means that there are some splits possible. We're not limited to 786 lots, equating to 786 houses. Go to the next one. So with those splits, under our current zoning, we can build up to 1,161 houses on the vacant land that we have available and still be compliant with current zoning regulations. So we find ourselves with quite a gap right now with the amount of land that we have in our single-family zones. As I said, I'm not going to focus too much on our multifamily development in parts of the city like downtown, some of the LIHTC housing developments that are proposed or underway or have been completed in the past few years. Those are simply too hard to calculate oftentimes. The number of units vary widely, specific to LIHTC projects, low-income housing tax credits. Those vary year by year. Sometimes we have a number of them in a single year that can be approved and be constructed. Sometimes we have 0 of them in a single year. So we didn't want to assume too many things about the number of units that would come from that. And again, 38% of our land in the city is zoned for single-family detached housing right now. So with that gap in mind, and with the limited amount of land that exists in the city to build on, how do we address this problem? There are several different zoning options that we're going to recommend today, and ultimately recommend to the City Commission. And then again, when they're more solidified, more fleshed out, they will be brought back to this board and run through a typical zoning ordinance amendment process. First one being reducing minimum lot size requirements. In similar ways to the first case on the agenda today, there are areas where a certain size of a lot is predominant, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't allow for smaller lots, just on the off chance that there are some smaller lots that maybe don't conform with many of the other regulations that are in place, and we could again make those buildable. An increase in housing choice, so this would be something along the lines of allowing for multifamily housing, small duplexes, accessory dwelling units, triplexes, all the way up to what we refer to as small multiplexes, up to 4 units. Allowing for single-family houses to add additional units. Right now in our single-family zones, if you have an existing single-family house, it cannot add an additional unit. And reduction or elimination of parking minimums. We have minimum parking requirements across the city, and this is specific to our residential zones. We are taking a look at those, and we'll go into a little bit more detail later on in the presentation.
So I'm going to be talking a little bit about our recommendations, what we've come up with to address this situation. The first would be to amend the R1 districts to match the current area and bulk requirements of the R3 districts, which would eliminate the R2 and R3 zoning districts. So we'd essentially be going back to just one R1 district, but we'd reduce the minimum lot sizes and widths to what is currently our R3. So you can see the R1, R2, and R3 and the different lot size requirements. We would simply just reduce those all to 3,000 square foot and 30 feet of road frontage. Go to the next slide. This map right here shows all 3 of the zoning districts right by each other. So this is R1, R2, and R3. The R3 is the checkered one. And you can see they're all right by each other now. They're just separated by blocks. But if you look closely, you can see, especially in the R2, many lots that look like they fit in the R1. And even in the R3, there's some that would fit in the R1. So there's already blocks, most of them, that are already mixed with different lot sizes anyways. It's just in 2015 when we did this, we decided to keep them by block, but really it's not necessary. So if we go to the next one, this is a scenario where we have R1 lots, and the lots are 50 foot wide, and just to the left where those cars park, that's actually a parking lot for a church, but it's zoned R1. It's 120 foot wide, so there's potential to only split that once to build 2 houses. But if we did this zoning amendment, we could actually put 4 new houses instead of 2, so we could double it. And it wouldn't really, in most areas, you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. Again, those are the same houses there on the right with 50 foot wide lots. And here's 4 houses in a row on 33 foot wide lots that basically are the same size and would blend in very well with the existing neighborhood. Here's another example of R1 zoning with the current lots in different sizes. And under current zoning, we could split this one time. We could get 4 lots instead of 3. But if we did the zoning amendment, this is what it could look like. And we could actually get 6 houses out of here instead of the 3. So it would just give more options for more housing in each block.
So the idea being behind this change that we need to really maximize what we can do with the current amount of land that we have. There's no guarantee that the lot splits that Mike showed would be immediately implemented. In fact, I think all of those properties are private properties. None of them are city-owned lots, so there's very little control that we would have over the types of housing that get built there and the size of the lots that those houses are built on. The idea being, with this change, we could bump our barometer up to about 1,500. So we're about halfway to our need at that point, and that is simply by reducing the minimum lot size requirements to match those of the R3 zone currently citywide. Again, I will have a disclaimer at the end, near the end of this presentation, that this is assuming maximization of the existing land. Many of the vacant lots, as you saw, 70% of them are privately owned, and private owners don't have to do anything with that land. They own it. They can decide to build on it. They can decide to sit on it and keep it as a side yard, whatever it might be. All of these graphs that show the steps that it would take to get us closer to our housing need are idealized scenarios, basically. This is maxing out what could be built under these various zoning classifications and various zoning amendments that are being proposed.
So recommendation 2 would be to amend R1 districts to allow up to 4 units, and ensuring that greater housing choice would be allowed everywhere. Previously, we've done this with form-based code into different neighborhoods. There was questions as to why not allow this everywhere. We have more of the vacant lots in our downtown area, and a lot of the blocks were set up that way. But it's true, it doesn't need to be in just the downtown neighborhoods, and especially with this housing shortage, we would recommend that we now do this everywhere. So, single family again compromises the largest zone land use in the city. They're the most restrictive zones in terms of land use. They only allow for single family, which is going to ensure that we're going to have a housing shortage well into the future. And again, form based code is not the only way to address this, which I'm going to get into next. Instead of proposing form based code everywhere, we could just take our section 400, which is our R1, R2, and R3 districts. At the top, it shows you that it's just single family homes, one family detached dwellings are allowed. Multiple families under certain conditions if they already exist. We got that implemented around 2015 as well, with some of the really large old lumber baron houses in our downtown area that may have needed a lot of work and were over 5,000 square feet and really was not feasible to keep these going without extra units. So the recommended amendment would be below, and instead of, again, the form-based code, we could just take some of those ideas, again, allowing the one-family detached dwellings, but allowing duplexes, but having provisions that they have to be on lots at least 40 feet wide, that we're not cramming too many units in too small of lots. We think that worked great with a form-based code, and it should be able to be replicated everywhere. And we could also talk about adding triplexes and quadplexes with at least 50 feet wide lots like it is in the form-based code, and accessory dwelling units we've been hearing more and more people want, and more people on the commission asking for those as well.
Yeah, so again, this gets us far closer to the stated need over the next 5 years. This brings us up to about 2,500 units that could take place on the existing land, and this is only assuming duplexes where they could be built. So not even going into the triplex or fourplex, which would get us beyond the need, which that added cushion would be very helpful in the sense that, like I said, a lot of these lots are privately owned, and it doesn't mean that they will be immediately developed, nor does it mean they will ever be developed. This particular build-out scenario takes into account the two previous recommendations that Mike mentioned. A change to the minimum lot size matching that of our current R3, and legalizing, in this case, duplexes specifically. There's quite a bit of capacity out there for housing, and doing so doesn't mean that immediately duplexes will be the only thing that is built, but this particular scenario in this chart assumes that that is the case. So again, it's very generous in its assumption in terms of the number of units that would be built, but it gets us far, far closer to the housing need that is immediately necessary.
Recommendation number 3 would be to allow single-family houses in form-based code districts to add units. Currently in our form-based code, we allow for duplexes and triplexes and all that. But we've taken the stance, and this is something that was wanted when we first got form-based code approved. There was some concerns about splitting up existing homes. And the way the ordinance is written, if you could go to the next page, there's a lot of design criteria, and most of the houses that are existing don't meet all of these. So we can simply say that if you're a single family home, you don't meet what a duplex requires in terms of design standards, so it's really not able to split it. We could go ahead and make an amendment that just clarifies that that's not even needed, and that single family homes could be converted into larger if they have the space to do so. We could also do that outside of the form-based code. We have residential design criteria, and we could come up with different criteria that could help additions for multiple units blend into the neighborhood and not really even be able to tell the difference between a single family and a duplex is what we're trying to get to.
The final recommendation that we have here is reducing or eliminating residential parking minimums. Right now, every new housing unit in the city that's built that is outside of the form-based code requires 2 off-street parking spaces per unit. This is arbitrary. This was implemented in 2002. The prior number was 1 parking space per dwelling unit, and it was changed about 20 years ago to double that amount. A new single-family house without alley access currently requires a minimum paid parking area that's nearly 2/3 the area of the minimum size of that house. So you would also have more pavement in the right-of-way for things like a driveway approach or where it crosses the sidewalk. In our multifamily zones, only 25% of our existing developments meet the current parking minimums. Many of them were built before the 2 spaces per unit were put in place, but a few of them that have been built since then only come up to that mark. Parking minimums really have an outsized influence on our land use, and it's specifically when it comes to building site plans. When a site plan must be manipulated to supply a required number of parking spaces, more than just the design of the project is affected. Parking minimums have a direct influence on housing costs and housing supply. And parking minimums physically limit the number of houses and units that can be built. Just second point here is evidence of that. Basically, when we, in our zoning ordinance, require a certain number of parking spaces for a building, for a house, we are devoting land that could be used for more housing to parking vehicles. This chart goes along with the point I made about multifamily housing. I know we're not focusing too much on it, but the changes to parking minimums would be across the board for all residential development potentially. It's much harder to calculate how many parking space an individual house would have versus a multifamily development. In this case, you can see all but 4 of the existing multifamily developments in the city exceed, or all but 4 are at or below 2 spaces per housing unit right now. As you can see, a few of these that are right at the threshold for 2 parking spaces per unit were actually developed recently. 2260 and 2216 Valley are a multifamily development in the East Muskegon neighborhood. 1085 Royal Glen is the Royal Glen Apartments. That is showing us that developers are building only what the city is requiring. What we often hear from developers, specifically LIHTC developers, is that they're going to build parking whether we have requirements or not. They would just prefer to build less of it. So there was a recent LIHTC development that was approved that they're, based on financing, required to build 1 parking space per unit. They happen to be in the form-based code, which would allow for that. But if they were in an area that's not zone form-based code, our regulations would require them to build 2 times what they want to build and what they know they need to build. We had another potential developer say that they find somewhere in the range of 1.5 parking spaces per unit works well for them. Again, if they're not building in an area that is different from our current parking regulations, they're going to be required to build 2 parking spaces per housing unit. The chart really speaks for itself, and the number of developments that really find no purpose in meeting the number that is required by a zoning ordinance today. And a lot of those higher end ones, the 4 that are off toward the left side of the chart, are much smaller developments. So you end up with fewer units, and the parking lots are sized in a way that they're not expansive, so it makes more sense to have a higher parking to unit ratio. So bringing that all back together, this is sort of the breakdown based on the recommendations shared today. Again, our current single-family capacity puts us at about 1,100 housing units. If we were to alter the minimum lot size to reflect that of our R3 zone, 30 feet of frontage and 3,000 square feet minimum area, we get about 1,500. Continuing on with that approach, if we're to allow duplexes specifically in this scenario, we could get up to about 2,500 with a much, much smaller deficit in terms of the number of housing. Again, this is the disclaimer that I mentioned earlier. 70% of the vacant lots that we're talking about here are privately owned. Important to remember that these are all idealized scenarios that are designed to yield the most housing units. Realistically, if we were to build on all of these vacant lots, it's nearly an impossible goal. It's just not feasible that everybody that owns vacant land in the city would come together and try to achieve the scenarios that are depicted in these charts. With the majority of the lots in private hands, the private owners are who will largely determine what's built on them, if anything at all. And in instances where privately owned vacant lots neighbor those that the city owns, the lot splits assumed in these scenarios will not be immediately possible, and all of this leads to a reduction in the total number of units that could be built that we're depicting. So again, this is very much on the high end of what could be built. It is an idealized scenario. Anything that we can build in to allow for more cushion, a lot of the LIHTC units, if you want to go to the next slide, have a continued focus on those. Berkshire, 1021 Jefferson, Samaritas, Amanita and Ellen Commons are a new project that is coming online, or will be beginning construction soon, as well as lofts on Muskegon. We continue to have a focus on market rate multiple family housing, and that's only in places where it's currently permitted by zoning regulations. Lakeview Lofts, the Leonard, and Western Place. Those all chip away at the housing need, but we know that with 38% of the city's land area zoned for single family housing, we can't ignore that part of the equation. All of these things have to come together to make this happen. And the presentation of these scenarios is to show the potential capacity that we have out in our city right now with just the vacant land that exists in our single family zones.
So we went over the 4 different types of recommendations, and they're all zoning amendments. So that's what the process would be. We would follow what is required by the Zoning Enabling Act, and that is they require a notice in the newspaper and a public hearing. The Planning Commission holds the public hearing and makes a recommendation to the City Commission. This is not a rezoning, so mailings would not be required, but that doesn't mean we don't think there should be public input. There definitely should be. We're suggesting that we get this information out to the NAM board and then to also hold a public input session in conjunction with our community engagement department this summer. We'd like to give this presentation and have some type of workshop where we can give input and explain the process and hear what options people are on board with. So eventually the request would be submitted at a subsequent planning commission meeting.
So we do have a few case studies that we'd also like to share. These are other cities that have been in the same position that we are in right now, a housing shortage, and that have taken efforts through zoning reform to try to address that. The first case study is a more similarly sized city to Muskegon, Auburn, Maine. They amended the zoning of over 1,600 acres in their town limits. And the main takeaway that you can see on the graph on the side there is that in 2021, the amendments happened, and in 2022, they saw a large increase in the number of housing units that were supplied. You can see that a lot of those were multifamily, and they made a change to their ordinance that allowed for small multifamily development in all residential districts, up to a triplex. They eliminated parking minimums, both things that are being recommended here, and they reduced minimum lot sizes, something that we have already headed down that path on, but I think there could be additional steps taken. Their reforms allowed for a minimum lot width of 24 feet for single family and duplexes, and increased their average housing units per acre from 9 up to 16. This allowed them to provide the much needed housing that they were seeking at that time. The second case study is from Minneapolis, Minnesota. They have been in the news quite a bit as they're touted as a nationwide leader in zoning reform. The biggest thing to take away from this is that their rental rates increased in Minneapolis at a much slower rate than Minnesota as a state and most major cities. This was due to a drastic increase in housing supply, and their reforms included duplex, triplex, quadplexes, accessory dwelling units as a right, use by right in all of the residential zones. They also eliminated parking minimums, and they also reduced minimum lot sizes. As you can see in the chart on the right, Minnesota's rent growth was at 4%. Wait, sorry. The change in the number of housing units was 12% in Minneapolis and only 4% in Minnesota, while the change in the average rent grew only 1% in Minneapolis, while it grew 14% statewide. And there was a reduction in homelessness, a 12% reduction versus a 14% growth in the state of Minnesota. Much of these results can be attributed to their efforts with zoning reform. It's being faced nationwide right now, and a lot of the things that are happening nationwide can be applicable here. This was our attempt to bring it down to a local context, one that would make sense for Muskegon and isn't just following the trends that you see nationwide, but you can see there are some changes that happen that really benefit the need or the ability to build more housing to meet these demands. As these proposals come back before you guys, we will have a more detailed presentation likely on each of them. We're just scratching the surface on the level of analysis that we've done so far. And any questions at this time?
Thank you, Planner Pesh. Thank you, Director Franzik. Commissioners, questions, thoughts?
Sure.
Commissioner Garn.
No, I just want to commend you on this. I've always been a proponent of, either moving forward citywide with, form-based code and neighborhood contact zones. But these potential options also give us the flexibility to offer, additional housing types and, get building going, once again. But as we go through this, I know that we'll be able to continue to make that point that we're not outlawing single-family housing, but we're allowing for, potential options, and you don't have to, do any of these other ones. And typically, you do see, people still build single-family housing, but this also gives us an opportunity to return back to what were traditional, building trends pre-World War II and in the end of the war, when all of a sudden the experts on high, in order to feed Fannie Mae and the different loans that started coming out afterwards, everything had to be single family, and we made everything single family. And we just addressed something before this when we did that, and either the intended or unintended consequences of we suddenly have a city full of non-conforming, illegal lots because there was little attention, given to the fact that we built out in the 19th century and the early 20th century, before we decided that, everybody had to have, a 50-foot lot and 2-stall garage and, room for a fountain or, whatever else. And we've been living with the reality, even in our single family, districts, of existing duplexes, triplexes, quads, that remain because that's what was going on prior to, 1947, 48, 49, 50. I think that continuing on this road to investigate options would serve us well in our ability to once again, provide for additional housing and build the market up where we can begin doing something, hopefully, like suppressing the increase of, rental units, or even the cost of housing overall, because we're in that supply and demand cycle right now where there's very little, so sellers can ask anything they want. But it definitely needs to be done, and I think it also served the city overall by making us a desirable place to live, increase our population, citizen participation rate, and everything from paying the bills to, joining their neighborhood associations and doing volunteerism. That's maybe a flight of fancy, but I don't think so. But the one word that sticks out, and it's not just with the parking minimums, the word arbitrary. I think it's continually essential to put the history out there. How so much of our zoning requirements have been arbitrary since post-World War II, in a drive to push us all out to live in Levitt towns and abandon the cities, and the horrible effect that it's had on the traditional town or urban cores, rural, old suburban, and old urban areas, because we've been operating at a handicap, and I think we'd be well served to be prepared to put those facts out, because we've been all living with this so long, since mom or dad or grandma and grandpa got their first, Fannie Mae or VA loan, and what that has meant to urban growth or even urban destruction. And I mean, we're sitting on all these empty lots. The required way hasn't served us. We got all these empty lots and nobody living on them. So I laud you for this great effort.
Thank you, Commissioner Garin. Any questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Willett Leroy.
Just some items for discussion, I guess, as we take some of these forward. Obviously, there's a large shortage in housing. It's clear and apparent. Lots of people want to be able to live in neighborhoods that they would choose to live in, right, rather than just where they can afford to live in. And I want to make sure that we balance that as we make housing choices, and that we consider that each neighborhood should be a place that people want to live and raise a family, and not simply where they are placed because it's convenient or the cheapest. I've spent a lot of time cleaning a lot of houses in this community over the last few years. Our housing stock is terrible. The houses that we have are pretty poorly maintained and poorly built overall, compared to a lot of other housing stock in the country, because that's just what we ended up with. So I think we need to, as we get all of these new properties built or suggested, that we need to hold people accountable to building things that are going to last, especially as we get more and more dense. It's harder to replace things once you build them. They don't go away. So it's not a negative. These are definitely needs that we have, but we have to be very thoughtful about them. And also, you mentioned a few other communities who've done similar efforts. It would be very helpful to showcase people visually what that looks like, right? What does a neighborhood look like? You gave a few 4 houses instead of 3 in our community, but frankly, none of those houses were very nice to look at. They're fine, they're houses, right? But there was nothing about them that said, this is a community I want to live in. And I think that we want to be able to see we want to see a glow up, right, of this density and how it can make us a more attractive city instead of just a really populated city. And I think that's what people are concerned about, is that density feels urban and scary, and we need to show density as desirable and walkable and engaging for people to have buy-in. So.
The word density, as we're educating ourselves and others, I think there's a real need that density doesn't necessarily equate with congestion. They're two totally separate things, and sometimes the opposition to any of these type of considerations operate on congestion as opposed to density, and there's a real difference. They're not interchangeable. They're not the same. But when you use the word density, that just came to mind, and that's why.
Yeah, I think that's important distinction, because you're right. When people hear density, they think and fear congestion.
Right.
And density is important. A number of different reasons, but supporting programming and services. The more people you have living in areas, the more revenue you're going to have to support programming and services, whether it's from the city or the county, libraries, museums, as well as support our small businesses in the area. So there's a number of benefits to it while managing the worst effects of that, which goes into congestion. How do you have managed congestion and mitigate concerns congestion around that? But the more people you have, the more of a community you have, and the more care for the community and our parks and whatnot. So there are a number of benefits, certainly, with density. And I think it's important that we do distinction between the two. Commissioner Seifert, do you have anything to add or ask right now?
All the points I was going to make have been hit by my fellow commissioners.
Commissioner Blake, anything to add or ask right now?
I can't follow Steve, but everything he said I agree with. I currently live in a zone that's I believe R3. So I'm used to the smaller housing area that I live in, and it's allowed me in the past 4 years that I own my home to get to know my neighbors, which I'm very blessed for because they help me out. So I think when you have larger parcels of land, you kind of miss opportunities like that.
Commissioner Blake, I think this case study here too, with regard to moderation of rental rates in Minneapolis and Minnesota, seeing the increase in housing units, helping to lessen the rise in average rents while also reducing homelessness. I think this is ultimately what we want to accomplish or see happen in our community. How can we limit the rise in rents? How can we reduce homelessness? Have more housing units, have more housing options. So I think this is the goal, where we want to get to. Ultimately, the question for the Planning Commission, our community, and the City Commission is how do we get there? You are presenting a number of different options and recommendations to get there. Whether all of them, need to be done or not, I mean, that's remains to be seen based upon the Planning Commission and our City Commission and our community discussing and deciding what's appropriate. And is it appropriate as a blanket across the city, or should there be more fine-tuning or catering to particular area? Zoning that's more customizable for a particular area versus blanket across the city. For me, I'd say recommendations 3 and 4 are the most interesting or intriguing to me. 4, certainly, I think there's opportunity to reduce the parking minimum. Like you said, it was doubled, some years ago, just arbitrarily, kind of randomly. And so I can see the benefit of reducing that. I jotted down recommendation. Can you 3? But I'm blanking right now in this moment. Can
Go back a couple slides
Yeah.
to the.
Yes, allowing single-family houses in FBC districts to add units as well. Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in that because if the district and the zoning allows it, and you have a house that exists in there, but because of some other ordinance saying, well, even though the conditions of the zoning or the land allows this, because some other piece of the zoning ordinance says no, that feels somewhat arbitrary. Like, we're saying if you were to build new here, you could do this, but because you have an existing house, you can't do that. And so I do think that it's sensible to provide that flexibility to say, hey, this is the underlying zoning. You can modify your building, your property to align with that. It's also just flexibility. We see needs for properties evolve over time. We see it even just with the Terrace Plaza building downtown. It was all offices, and it was like, hey, we need residential. Let's convert some of these offices into residential. And so we accommodated that. And so I see that similarly here. It's like, we need more housing units. This is allowed in this district. It's just prohibited because some other clause elsewhere.
I think that's an underlying theme in all of this, that we put together a neat and tidy presentation, but everything out there is obviously not that way all the time. Biggest thing to remember is that we can't build out our entire city or even individual neighborhoods to a final state. They're always in development, they're always evolving, they're always changing, and allowing for that flexibility, like you just described, to say, okay, this is a need today, how can we accommodate it? And maybe that was a need of past years, but it can still happen, it just isn't what we need today. So building in the added flexibility is critical in ensuring that Muskegon remains a place for everybody, and ensuring that we continue to meet some of these very clear metrics. It's just on the ground, it always looks very different in different places.
With regard to the second recommendation of amending R1 districts to allow up to 4 units everywhere, I think I'm probably on board with duplexes everywhere in R1. I'm not convinced yet on triplexes or quadplexes, but obviously there's going to be further discussion and have opportunities to hear from the community and for me to engage with staff and to understand what that looks like and how that would play out in kind of the real world as well. I think that's important. I mean, there's one part just thinking about things conceptually and then understanding how it actually plays out in the real world, and the built environment has changed or people's lived experiences are changed in their neighborhoods. So that I still need to digest and understand better and confer with folks. I do see Commissioner Seifert. Is this you piggybacking something I just said? Because otherwise, I saw Commissioner. I'll let Leroy have something.
She can go first. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to, again, this is not against these ideas presented. They're all things we need to explore, but I just try to think kind of ahead of what are people going to be concerned about, right? So it kind of goes back to some of our general goals, which is that we need to imagine where people are going to enjoy their community if we densify these spaces. So we need to anticipate more usage of our parklands, our green spaces, making them accessible, making them inviting, and making them places that people feel that they're going to use instead of their backyard. If there's 4 units in a home, the way we use those spaces is going to change, and we need to make sure that there's a lot of easy, enjoyable access here.
I think that's important as we're moving forward with intentionality of trying to create more density, whether it's certain areas or all areas of our city, is coming up with some kind of working metric of, resident per acre of green space or parkland or whatnot. I mean, we've got a lot as a city, and we're probably above standards or averages across the country, across the state. Like, we've got a lot, and it's good, and we value it, and we're putting investments in enhancing and improving what we have. But I think it is important to kind of come up with some sort of working metric. What's an ideal? Where we're at? What's the ideal? What's the minimum? Like, we don't want to, have go below a certain threshold of parkland per resident. So I'd be interested in trying to understand, wrap my head around that, some kind of working metric of a ratio. But Commissioner Seifert.
Yeah, I guess kind of 2 things now, kind of building off both of your comments. It would be interesting if we can show, and obviously we can work on this as staff, by having additional density, what that does to revenues and how we can how that helps with parks and doing those enhancements and things of that nature. And another comment I wanted to make regarding whether it's duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, we have a number of examples throughout the community of very well done, originally well done as duplexes and triplexes. I'm thinking of a number of gorgeous homes on Ransom that when you drive by and you see how they were actually originally set up as duplexes. And then there's a number in Lakeside that were built as triplexes that I didn't really realize until I started doing some other things related to short-term rentals and being more deliberate as I drove around town. Obviously, growing up here, you look at things one way, and then when you get into these positions, you look at things slightly differently, and realizing that there are many homes like that. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law live right around the corner from Commissioner Gowron, and they are in a original up and down duplex, but you wouldn't know it from looking from the outside.
We have a lot of those.
Yeah, we've got a lot of those. Yeah,
Right.
so they can blend right into the environment that's around there, and we have a tradition of having those type of housing options in the community.
We do.
Learning from those is critical.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Learning from those and the designs that were used is critical. It's almost a vernacular at that point, right? It's
Commissioner.
Just food for thought. We were a city of nearly 50,000 people, and everything from our infrastructure to parks were built around 50,000 people, and we're under 38. So we have a ways to go to get back to 50,000 people, which we probably need in order to pay the cost of the infrastructure in neighborhoods where we have 3 houses on lots or on blocks that, you know, need to have 12 on them. And when it comes to, you know, our own holdings, when you're down to under 38,000 people, it's kind of hard to keep up with having to take care of your parkland. Remember, when we look at parks, parks are beautiful, or can be, but they're not always the answer to the issue of making a good town or a good neighborhood. I think you can look in any city USA and find where parks are underused because they're big scary places, or an empty spot, because a park is only as good as a neighborhood. And probably, if you want a good park, concentrate on the neighborhood. And we have one not too far from here, which nobody used, except for people that would leave their waste and do their nefarious dealing or whatnot. But it became a park when another empty, scary place ended up with new homes on it and suddenly became a neighborhood. People make the difference.
Two things come to mind from our master land use plan. One of which, and I haven't internalized the number, but I want to say that from our peak population, due to population loss and things like annexation of new areas, our citywide density has decreased significantly in the last 50 to 70 years, back from the peak in the 50s. And the other thing that comes to mind is that when we talk about our park space and the need to have an adequate amount of it, I would encourage everybody to think about our streets too. Those are, in our master plan, I want to say, in terms of acreage, they account for more public space than our parks do. How we use our streets, what we allocate that space to,
Yes.
comfortable, inviting, livable, walkable, all of
I have a question.
Yes,
I don't know if
Commissioner.
it's relevant to this, but I was gonna ask anyway. Do we have an inventory of our alleys? I'd be curious
made
on the
that.
square footage that those take up.
Yeah, we did quite a bit of that with our master.
Yeah, and oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, alleys aren't always owned by the city.
I understand.
Yeah, so it's so there's this weird dynamic there on whether it's an easement or, you know, sometimes it is owned by the city, but it's this weird nebulous thing sometimes.
Speaking of alleys,
General topic I want to talk
Yeah,
about. So if you want to
okay.
do it separately, that's fine.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just wanted to know while we're talking about square footage of space.
well, speaking of alleys though, because in our form-based code, urban residential context area, in order to allow, you have to have a paved alley for quadplexes, correct?
3 and 4 plexes.
3 and 4.
We didn't list that today, but it's something we want to discuss at the meetings.
Okay, that's what I was
How we
wondering how
craft it.
this,
Yeah.
you know, intersects with that, because if we're talking about allowing triplexes and quadplexes everywhere, are we going to have that condition that it must be a paved alleyway as well, just like we do in our form-based code?
I would say with a quadplex for sure, but recently we've seen a lot of designs where triplexes work very well and function almost as duplexes. So I think for sure a fourplex probably would need one.
Okay. So, given these zoning recommendations, I see no reference to, well, aside from allowing single-family houses in form-based code districts to add units, I don't see any reference of expanding form-based code as a way towards creating more housing options or housing units. So, should I infer that as staff is no longer interested in expanding form-based code and we're pivoting, or this part of that as part of this process as well?
I think we can accomplish it without the form-based code. The form-based code just has a lot more design requirements in it, and it was really crafted for the downtown skinny lot neighborhoods. So moving it out into areas where the lots are a little bit larger probably doesn't make sense to have those same standards anyways. So I think this is probably a better approach to where we can still address the housing choice, but don't have to worry so much about those design requirements, because Lakeside's very different from downtown. It's just very different from Marquette. So
Also add that specific context areas of the form-based code, I think is what we mean
Yes.
by that. So when we're looking at our lower density residential neighborhoods, ones that are, majority single-family houses, we would consider for an urban residential context area, the ones that have been discussed in the past. When we look at things like our commercial corridors, though, I think form-based code still offers a lot of solutions for those areas and making them inviting to the surrounding neighborhoods that, might be largely residential. You don't need the flexibility or the design requirements that always come with the form-based code. But when you're looking at those corridors, the Apple Avenues, the Gettys, the Lakedens, things like that, if we want to make those inviting places for neighbors, that the form-based code really does offer solutions there, I think.
Thank you for answering my next question.
So, I'll be very interested. We will have public comment at the end, and you can address at that time. We're almost wrapped up. We're almost wrapped up. And I will be interested in this question or commentary that I have. I will be interested in hearing Commissioner Garwin's perspective in particular. But form-based code, different context areas exist already in the NIMS neighborhood. Most of the neighborhood is not under form-based code, but it has moved into portions of our neighborhood. And I personally am interested in the form-based code extending to the entirety of the neighborhood with the appropriate context areas. It's not one size fits all for the whole neighborhood. As you mentioned, there's certain commercial corridors. There's different contours of the neighborhood,
Right.
and different conditions and different uses. And so, I personally would be interested in seeing form-based code potentially expanded to the neighborhood with the appropriate context areas. But I would particularly welcome my neighbor, Commissioner Garwin, to weigh in, and then fellow planning commissioner, his thoughts on that.
I'd like to give staff more time to chew on that being thrown out in the context of this, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed. I'm a firm believer in great benefits of form-based code and neighborhood context, but at the same time, if we can achieve many of the same results or potential benefits, going in this direction. But I know that there will be a major push for looking at, business corridor development and whatnot. But I'd sure as heck be open to it. I really would. But I know that as you're developing these ideas and we're considering them, I know there's a real rational strategy for moving in this direction, and being able to hopefully reap great benefits from it. But I wouldn't say no.
Okay. Well, thank you, Commissioner Garwin. Are there any other questions or comments at this time on this item? So your expectation is to bring this forward to NAM, and then
Yeah, we're gonna go.
I saw NAM.
So
What's
the
the process?
first step would be, we're planning to bring it to City Commission for presentation,
Yeah.
similar
Presentation
presentation.
first. Okay.
We'll tweak it based on the feedback we heard today, just slightly, and just so that it stays relevant.
Is that shorter?
Shorter, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll be presenting to the City Commission. We'll have questions, answered, deliberations at the City Commission, and then you'll be bringing it forward to NAM and the community, presuming the Commission wishes to continue this process. Yeah. Okay.
Well, we're considering NAM part of the public outreach, so NAM and whatever we can come up with the community engagement department.
Okay. Excellent. Well, there's no action on this item. We are going to go to public comment at this time.
Yep.
And I'd welcome, if you'd come up to the podium,
Yeah.
Miss Renee Comeric, joining us from the Pure Marquette / Beach Booth.
Yes. Okay, on the one, I took a picture of it. Single-family residential zones, the pie chart, and then where it says, 1, 2, and 3, and what the requirements are. So there's a asterisk by height. And I know I was here when they wanted to go up 45 feet. So why is there an asterisk on height? And then it says there two
Yeah,
stories or 35 feet.
The asterisk, there's a provision in a very small area for historic homes. I think that has to do
okay.
with the Jefferson Street district, right, Jamie?
Well, it deals with historic districts where it may be more applicable to have a taller house because the surrounding houses are tall. And
I didn't see that before.
There's a number of asterisks below that.
Okay.
That weren't included in the slides.
Other question is, didn't we just do Nelson Street from R1 to R2, and now you're going to eliminate 2 and 3 and make them all one with a big?
If
Or
we
did I
want to
miss
add more
something?
housing, that's something we are suggesting to consider. Yes.
That's okay.
It's very odd. Yes,
This
it
takes
was
care of the people that weren't
odd
concerned.
timing, but that's a good catch.
Thank you. I
Peculiar
gotta go.
sequence. Thank you, Ms. Comerick.
You're welcome.
Take care and be well. All right, any other business? I'm sorry, I skipped over that, went straight to public comment. But before we adjourn, is there any other business?
I just had a question.
Yes.
Basically about alleys. So, firstly, if we have two things actually. If we have a request regarding a proposed ordinance, does that, as for regarding land use, does that first come here, or does it go directly to City Commission?
It comes
Just
here for a
point of
public
order?
hearing.
Okay. So as I mentioned during public comment at the City Commission, I think we need to address an ordinance of the use of the public infrastructure along waterways, things like seawalls, for docking, mooring, anchoring. We need to be very clear as we become a more utilized boating community. And so I don't know if we can kind of bring that back for discussion or talk about that in some way, but that's something I feel that we need pretty strongly. And then on alleys, I think it's helpful to have that overall understanding of what are all of the alleys in the city and then how many of them we do have under public ownership. Because I know we're looking at paving some of them in order to kind of build people using them and keeping, basically, let me explain, that I live in an urban part of town, and what the alleys are mostly used for is crime. They're also used for people passing through town that could just use sidewalks or other modes of transport, but they're basically often used for folks to travel between buildings in an illicit manner. And so it makes things feel very unsafe. They're not lit, they're just generally a hazard in a lot of ways. A lot of them are completely unmaintained. So I think there's some things that we could do besides paving them if there are some that we don't need. And I just wanted to maybe talk about how we can work through that. Those are my items.
Called out in the master plan to do an assessment of them and evaluate their purpose. So that's definitely on our radar.
That's what I got.
Any other questions or comments at this time under any other business? No? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Support. We have a motion to adjourn and supported. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care and be well.
Air temperature 54 degrees. Wait.